Happy Migraine Awareness Month, everyone. All throughout this month, we are thriving with migraine. That is that we're talking to interesting people who are doing great things and they just happen to live with migraine, right? So today we're talking to a great researcher who has an area of research that is very close to my interests. That is Clare Southerton from UNSW. Thanks for joining us, Clare.
I'm happy to be here.
All right, tell us about your area of research.
So I'm a digital sociologist, which means that I'm interested in like social life, but how it happens online. And my specific area of research is kind of everything health related. And so how kind of we talk about health and kind of manage our health online in digital spaces. So whether that be, you know, talking about like forming a Facebook group about your health conditions. So something like migraines would be a really great example. But I'm also interested in how digital health technologies become part of how we manage our health. So things like Fitbits are really interesting, or even just like normal technologies like smartphones and the apps that we use on those devices. So all the kind of intersections between technologies and health is kind of like where my research is at.
Yeah. So you and I connected on Twitter not that long ago because you were talking about misinformation online. Now, my PhD, for those who haven't been subjected to, you know, my PhD venting, which PhD people do, I've thankfully now finished, was about how people decide who to vote. So, of course, misinformation is really big on that. So what's your thinking there? I know this is new research you've just started to do, but what are you looking for? Because misinformation, this is how we connected, right? Is talking about misinformation around migraine online is just epidemic. What are you looking for?
Yeah, so we're really interested in understanding like what is it about that makes misinformation appealing. Mm-hmm. Especially in the health space, there are huge kind of wellness communities where misinformation is really rife. So I think everybody will be kind of familiar with like the Gwyneth Paltrow Goop sort of, you know, like trends that, you know, like suddenly it's like everybody's like trying to steam clean their vaginas and stuff like that. So there's that kind of trend I think is really familiar. Uh-huh. But we're really interested in understanding like what is it about our kind of contemporary health and medical system that makes misinformation appealing. Like, why does misinformation feel good? Why is it alluring? And what are the kind of gaps in our health system that create spaces for misinformation to flourish? And kind of what is the role of technology in that as well? And so it's kind of an interesting picture, because if you think about something like migraines as a really rich example of the space for people who have migraine, because it's like we have a health system that isn't really good at dealing with our problem. Yep. Because, you know, doesn't really take our pain very seriously, really struggles with the messiness of a condition that's not resolvable. So there's gaps in the health system, also a system that's really rife with inequality. So, you know, a sexist health system that doesn't deal well with women's pain, and it's a condition that disproportionately affects women. You know, you've also got a health system that disproportionately affects like people of color and people who are queer, and sort of a whole range of like different identities are impacted differently. So you have the inequalities of the health system that create the conditions where people will be looking elsewhere for information. And then you also have this like sort of neoliberal entrepreneurialism that is springing up online, where people are kind of wanting to make money like outside of kind of traditional jobs, right? So there's sort of these like competing bigger issues. And then you also have like the kind of social media platforms where people can kind of access each other and information really, really quickly. And then you also have the felt reality of having a chronic illness, where you kind of, I'm sure you have that experience where you're so sick and you're in so much pain, you just want somebody to tell you that there's the possibility that you could feel better. So those conditions are really, really ripe, I think, for someone to offer you something that is dubious. And I think our research is kind of wanting to think through and try and understand, like, how does misinformation work beyond the simple fact that it's not true, you know, and rather than not wanting to be ungenerous to people who buy into a scam, because so far I think some of the thinking has really seen those people as foolish, and I really don't think it's that simple.
No, I don't think it's that simple either. I mean, certainly, we see even in the Migraine Australia chat group, people are posting stuff all the time, asking their peers if this is a scam or it's worthwhile trying out. And a lot of that is desperation. As you said, it's the gaps in the system. So for a very long time, there hasn't been treatments. We've now got good drugs that do work for most people, but we can't get them. So people are spending, hundreds and hundreds of dollars a year trying all these random things that, push this bit of air into your ear and drink this water and you will suddenly never have migraines again. Like, it's just crazy the amount of there's different layers too, right? There's scams, like outright scams, and then there's people who genuinely believe something works, right?
Yes,
so
absolutely.
The people that repackage ginger and peppermint oil into a specific roll and put a migraine name on it and then charge you $130 instead of $5. And then there's people that are just advocating for the use of, say, peppermint oil, and they really do believe it works. And then there's other people that believe a certain diet works, and they're quite advocating all over the internet for this thing, largely because they want their own beliefs to be validated.
Yes.
And that's where I start to see the crossover to the political misinformation, right? So in the political stuff, a lot of it is people wanting their own views of the world to be validated. So they go and find some crazy person on the internet who is saying, yes, China is coming to get us and we all need to lock down and close all our borders and never, send any money overseas for foreign, welfare or whatever it is that they're going on about. And they go, yeah. And they just want their own experience to be validated. Now, in a space like migraine, or even in any of the kind of chronic health conditions that affect largely women, right? So we're talking fibromyalgia and ME/CFS and endometriosis and all those kinds of things.
Yeah.
There's these huge gaps in the system, and there are huge communities. Almost all of them have their own collection of nonsense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the point about wanting your views to be validated is such an important one, because I think, if you've been to, like, it's so complex in the space of health, because, if you, like, pain is really subjective. So if you've been to the doctor and you're saying, I'm in a lot of pain, and they kind of say, oh yeah, like, have you tried taking a Panadol? Or if you, they give you a kind of like fobbing you off kind of response. And then if you go online and someone says, yeah, I really take your pain seriously, but they're offering you a kind of, what we might consider a pretty, like, scammy treatment, at least they're telling you, I believe you, and I believe your pain, and I'm taking you seriously. So it's so complex, because, like, a lot of these spaces, even if they are rife with what we would consider misinformation, they may offer people serious emotional support that we can't necessarily discount. So it's really complex, because the inadequacies of our medical system, like, absolutely, like, create the conditions for people to misinform and to kind of offer people things that aren't necessarily, going to help them. But even some of these, treatments that are not backed up by evidence may help people, because they give them a sense of control over their body that they may not be able to access if they go to a doctor who tells them that there's nothing they can do.
Yeah. This is such really, really important research, and I'm so happy you're doing it. But let's talk about your migraine. So when did your migraine start? And what kind do you have?
They started, it's sort of tricky to know when they started, because I think they started when I was very young. I have a kind of, like, classic migraine that I don't get much of an aura, but I get, like, a lot of digestive stuff, so I vomit a lot. That's my when I was a kid, I vomited a lot, but I didn't get much of a headache. So I think they started when I was very young. And I've kind of,
when did it get diagnosed?
Most of my childhood, when I was about 8 or 9, I started, like, throwing up a lot. But of course, like, nobody knew what that was, so they were just like, that's weird that she throws up all the time. So I probably had them for since I was about 8 or 9. And I got diagnosed probably in my teen years, and have kind of didn't really get onto preventative medication until I was in the final years of my PhD. which would have been nicer to have earlier on the section.
Yeah, a bit earlier in the PhD, or, you know, perhaps as an undergrad would have been great, I'm sure.
Yeah. But I think, you know, I think this is an experience a lot of people have, is that like when you tell, you know, a doctor that you're having these headaches, or that you're having, like, you know, especially if you don't have a diagnosis and you're kind of just like, I have a headache, that I think it's a headache, and of course it's not, but, you know, you're experiencing these symptoms. I think it's very difficult to get someone to kind of take that seriously. But when I eventually did get preventative medication, I tried a whole range of preventative medication, and now I'm on Topamax. And that is really the only reason I'm able to have a job, because during my PhD I was like extremely dysfunctional, and yeah, and that has luckily been fairly effective for me, to the point that it's like somewhat controllable and manageable. But it's sort of, I think I'm also lucky that I'm in a job where I have a fair amount of freedom about what I do every day, which is really important, because when I used to work in retail and I was like, you know, you have to be in the shop, you can't just like go away. That was really hard, because, you know, if you get a migraine, there's really no way to, you know, keep standing there and being friendly and nice. And so I'm really lucky that my job now, I have a lot of flexibility about how I can work and where I can work, and that really makes it a lot more manageable. Even though, of course, like it's really, there's so much, like, I think ableism in all professions, but I think especially in academia, it's a conversation that a lot of academics, and you would be very aware of this, you know, a lot of academics having this conversation now about like, you know, what can be done about this when you're in such a competitive industry. How do you kind of make space for people who, you know, don't have typical bodies and don't have typical, you know,
I've
like,
always referred to it as the oxymoron of universities, right? There's a whole lot of policies and all of these affirmations about how we support all of our people with disabilities. But the guts of what particularly research academics are required to do, which is compete with each other.
Yeah.
And you compete on outputs that are, you know, like they're not judged on quality. They're not judged on how much you change the world. It's how many papers did you write? How many papers did you get published? How many conferences did you attend? Is incredibly ableist. And there are lots of really brilliant people who could very well be working academics, or even at, you know, at part-time, or, you know, 0.6 or whatever. But they don't even get a look in, because there's a, you know, possibility that they might not be able to go to a particular conference. It's kind of one of these, we need to have a really hard conversation with the university sector. Because, you know, we're talking about a lot of people who have been told and promised that they will be supported in the university space, and they won't be. So you kind of have to, you know, it is good in the sense that, as you said, you've got flexibility. It's one of the reasons why I did a PhD, was to open up an academic track if I wanted to go that way. Because, you know, even doing the PhD, you have a fair amount of flexibility. You don't have to be on campus every day, as long as you meet your milestones and you actually deliver the thesis at the end. You know, people are generally happy and okay. But then there's this thing of, well, actually, if you want to succeed, if you wanted to make it in the professoriate, if you want to, you know, actually get the pay bump next time round, or even actually just get a job that isn't a 12-month contract, then you need to be able to work full-time and not have issues, whatever those issues are, right? Mental health, physical health, kids, doesn't matter. None of that stuff counts. You make sure you turn up at the conference and you do it for the papers.
Exactly right. And I
that
think
was a nice bench. Thank you.
No, I mean, it's really good to be able to talk about this stuff, because I feel like it is a real, even like about the fact that I have migraines, I'm not very open. Like, I'm open about it to some people at work, but really it's like, it's almost like you don't want to make that, I mean, certainly when you're like applying for a job, you're not like, yes, I have this, you know, chronic health condition. It's such a taboo in the industry, because it's fine to have, a health condition. It's fine to have any of those things, as long as your output remains at the same level as everyone else, which is really, that's not accommodating people at all, And I found this during my PhD as well, that, everybody was like, yeah, of course we can be flexible for you. You can, be sick and whatever. But at the end of the day, I wasn't able to take any sick leave. So I had, you have sick leave in your PhD.
Yeah.
Supposedly, but I wasn't able to take any because the sick leave was set up for someone who like breaks their leg or has a car accident, and you get a doctor's note and you take 2 weeks off or 6 months off or however long. But it's not set up for someone to have, a chronic condition. That's just not what it's set up for. And so they can say all of the stuff about like, yeah, we'll be supportive, but ultimately it sort of never happens.
Yeah, basically. I mean, it's actually pretty good as an undergrad. They're much more, the disability support side is much better as an undergrad. Once you get into postgrad, that support kind of really fades away, and all they care about is the output. But it's, look, one of the things I get really passionate about is there's a lot of really great academic minds who live with migraine. Some of them, like yourself and Ben Harris-Roxas, who we've also spoken to in one of our Thriving with Migraine interviews, are able to talk about it, and they're okay admitting it, but they're pretty cagey. They don't go around advertising it. But there's lots who won't talk about it at all, and they're kind of being really quite clear when we've approached them to do a Thriving with Migraine interview. They're kind of like, nah. And that's fine, right? Wherever you're at in your journey is where you're at in your journey. But because our brains work faster, right? Just like literally genetically, biologically programmed to work faster, there's a lot of us that are in high thinking type roles, whether it's academia or say banking and finance or strategic leadership type roles, just because we have brains that work faster. If we can manage our condition, then we're capable of doing really great and amazing things, because we have brains that work faster. But because most of us can't eliminate migraine attacks completely, we can manage them, we can control, but we need that flexibility. If we have employers, whether they're in the university sector or anywhere else, that allows us to make up in the straights what we lose in the corners, we're great employees. It's just about having that understanding. Research academia in particular should be built for that. But because everything is still so anchored to conferences that you need to physically be at, it doesn't work that way. Or, you need to produce so many papers, whatever. So the cost that I had in my PhD was I had to switch universities in the middle. Whole story. I'll tell you about it one day. But I didn't publish, right? So, my supervisors were very big on publishing. We had a schedule of kind of 20 odd papers that we were going to publish, because the stuff that I was doing was so new, never been done in Australia before. So we're like, yep, write it up. I didn't publish any papers. I did 2 conference papers and that's it. Now, the problem then becomes that when you try and get an academic job after your PhD, all they care about is what did you publish? So this is what we mean by having enablers kind of thing. All right. Thank you so much. We will talk more about this, I'm sure. And there are lots more really interesting chats with Thriving with Migraine throughout Migraine Awareness Month.